director questions through the chair. Senator Roberts, you have a question.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for appearing today. Just to clarify, I looked up the definition of regime. It includes the government of the day. So, Senator Watt, you are part of the Albanese regime. And Mr.
You've got questions?
Yes, I have. Mr. Pizzullo, I just want to clarify that. Mr. Pizzullo, counter-terrorism is important. I want to say that up front. Extremists can pose a threat. I want to say that up front. But labelling and categorising people, anti-vax, etc., that is not okay. What has been the arrangement between Home Affairs and social media platforms to intervene or censor or block posts that were or are contrary to government policy related to COVID-19? Was it purely being the conduit from the Department of Health to the media platforms?
And also making judgments against the platform's own policies. But to answer the Senator's question, I said earlier that we're not the arbiters of health science. So can you describe what might have triggered action on the part of our staff to start to draft up a referral, for instance? Ms Hawkins.
So, Senator, in terms of the way I was answering the previous Senator's question, I would say to you that the government was concerned about instances of harmful mis and disinformation in relation to COVID. This line of effort was set up in 2020. As the Secretary has said, it came out of the fact that we had been doing referrals in relation to terrorist, violent and extremist content. And as I understand the Secretary's evidence in terms of having conversations with the Department of Health so early in the piece about the fact that we could use that same kind of mechanism to provide referrals about harmful mis and disinformation in relation to COVID. We could use a similar technique that we had been using in the context of terrorist, violent and extremist content. We could use that same kind of technique in relation to harmful mis and disinformation in the context of COVID. So, for example, in relation to Facebook's policies on mis and disinformation, we scanned the environment, we identified where there were harmful instances of mis and disinformation in relation to COVID, and then we provided those referrals to platforms such as Facebook for them to determine against their own policy about not allowing COVID mis and disinformation on their platforms. So in relation to their own policy, we then made referrals to say, you might want to look at these posts because in the context of your own policy about not having COVID mis and disinformation on your platform. So that's what we have been doing since 2020, and as the Secretary said earlier, we will finish doing that on the 30th of June this year.
So, Mr. Pizzullo, your department has been a conduit between the Department of Health and Meta and other platforms, and those platforms have been funded by Big Pharma to shut down posts that call any questions about the COVID-19 injections. So you're actually aiding and abetting censorship of relevant and scientifically correct information, because as Senator Antic pointed out, much of what was called information, labelled information, by people like Meta, is now found to be correct and true. So you aided and abetted in the injection of Australians and led to 30,000 excess deaths in 2022.
Senator Roberts, do you have a question?
Yes, I did.
That's what the officials are here to do, is to answer your questions.
You were a conduit from the Department of Health to Meta and other platforms. Are you a conduit for any other departments? And do you follow their instructions just like you follow the Department of Health?
Well, on the question of health, conduit might not be the right phrase, because that would imply that an action was initiated in the Department of Health, sent to us as, if you like, a clearinghouse and then on-forwarded. I think the evidence that you've heard is that in order to relieve the Department of Health at the time when we were dealing with the front end of a public health crisis, is that we stepped into that breach to say, look, we've got the capability, just as long as we can understand from ATAGI and others what the broad parameters are of health information that the public should be advised of versus harmful information, we'll run with that, and we put in place a program that allowed us to do that. As to your characterisation of the COVID response, the efficacy of vaccines, you made reference to Australians being injected. I would really ask you to direct those questions to the Department of Health.
I will be.
I'm sure you will be, but they're better qualified to give you a better view, certainly, than I can about the efficacy of that advice. So we're not a health department. We don't have sort of an independent way of saying to
So you're a conduit?
Well, conduit, again, I'll just repeat what I said.
You take orders from the Department of Health?
A conduit implies that there's an action catalysed, initiated in one department, comes through a middle broker such as ourselves and ends up with Facebook. Other than the policy settings being made known to us by the Department of Health, this was an area of action, like so many other things in the early days of COVID, where we didn't need any instructions. We were just told to get on with a function, which we performed, and occasionally there'd be engagement with health to make sure that we weren't operating off obsolete information.
So you were just told to do it. Who was the service provider advising you on what was and wasn't misinformation?
Well, we use the service provider to do the scanning, do we not? That's right.
That's right. Senator, the service provider that we have used is M&C Saatchi.
Who do the scanning?
Who do the scanning?
They're not sort of scientific advisors as such.
So they're scanning the platforms, and they are then providing us with proposed referrals that they consider are in breach of the platform's own policy on mis and disinformation in relation to COVID. And then there would be staff in my team who would consider that, and then after considering Saatchi's proposed referrals, then we would decide whether or not to pass it on to the platform.
So who is Saatchi and how do you spell it?
Saatchi.
I think it's MC.
So they're scanners.
M&C Saatchi, indeed.
MC, isn't it?
They're scanners. So is it not true that it was said in past Senate estimates that Home Affairs considers that a significant threat to Australia is that of domestic terrorism?
I'm sorry, Senator.
Isn't it true that in past Senate estimates, Home Affairs has said that it considers a significant threat to Australia as that of domestic terrorism?
Most certainly. That's one of the key risks that we seek to manage, yes.
Do you consider that those who would challenge the safety and effectiveness of COVID-19 vaccinations are domestic terrorists if they challenge government policy?
Not if it wasn't associated with any extremism, politically motivated violence or planning to attack institutions of society, no.
Do you consider that those senators who have posted comments opposed to the COVID-19 mandated vaccines injections are domestic terrorists?
That senators?
Yes.
You can post whatever you like, Senator. I mean, you've got the privilege of being a senator.
I'm pleased that you just said I can post whatever I like, but Meta and so will not let people like Senator Antic, myself, Senator.
Well, if they with their own service conditions take your post down, then you can deal with them as a elected representative, and if you want to contest their takedown, then feel free.
Are you aware of any social media posts by elected members of this Senate that have been secretly censored through this arrangement?
I have no advice or information on that.
Interfered with in any way?
I don't know.
Limited in reach, not just censored, but limited in reach, so we can get to fewer people.
A posting by a member of the House or the Senate, I don't know. And I will check that in the when we come back to Senator Antic, will I be surprised to learn that there were any referrals that related to a member of Parliament?
I hope not.
I'll check, but I'm rather thinking I won't be surprised.
Are you aware of any posts by members of Parliament that were taken down as a result of your actions?
Well, that was a side discussion I just had. I don't even know that we made any referrals that related to parliamentarians, but
I'd have to take it on notice, Senator.
I'd be surprised and verging on disappointed if we had.
Could you find out in particular if Home Affairs has been involved with or responsible for any of the posts that have been taken down off my media pages and also restricted in any way?
We will. That's in effect a subset of the question asked by Senator Antic, but we'll make a particular effort to check, because I'm interested as well, because there are questions of privilege that I'd be much more respectful of than Facebook might be, and it might well be that if we have made such a referral, it's something that I'll need to reflect on, but I'll check. In fact, why don't I come back to you directly in relation to your own personal circumstances on notice?
Thank you. We've been several MPs in both the Senate and the House of Representatives have been heavily censored for posting material that was classified by social media platforms as misinformation and is now found to be true?
Well, I've got nothing to... I don't know. The latter part of your... the assertion in what might have been a question, I'm not quite sure, but I just don't have any basis for thinking something that was considered to be misinformation at the time under social media policies have now, through some kind of scientific evolution, be considered to be true. I just don't know.
Senator Roberts, would you mind just clarifying who it is that you say has found these comments to have been true?
The government itself, Pfizer has admitted itself that the COVID injections are not safe and effective, yet the government, the previous regime under Morrison, said that they were safe and effective. They are neither effective nor safe. They are negative efficacy,
Well,
and that's proven.
That's always been your opinion, but I'm wondering which authority you're pointing to that has deemed that
Pfizer vice presidents.
Pfizer vice presidents
Pfizer vice
say
presidents.
that it's not...
As interesting as this is, I don't think it's in order for the minister to ask a senator question.
One of your senators was asking about this as well.
No, a minister's directing questions to a senator. I don't think that's the usual order.
Well, I mean, when an assertion is
Mr.
made
Pizzulo,
that things are true...
Are you aware that...
Senators, I think the minister's actually trying to assist Senator Roberts, as I think most of us do. If we can... Senator Roberts...
Well, if an assertion is going to be made that something is untrue, I think someone...
Minister, I'm speaking. Thank you. Senator, you have one last question, and then I have to hand over the call to Senator Patterson.
Can you check this afternoon?
How many other senators have had their media posts censored through these arrangements? Could you get back to me on that one as well, please?
I will, as a further subset to the question taken on notice from Senator Antich, make a particular point of checking whether any referrals related to members of the House or the Senate.
Okay, my final question is...
Inclusive of you, but others as well.
Yes, thank you. If senators have had their media posts censored by Home Affairs being a conduit to Meta and other platforms, then I call for a full Royal Commission to get to the bottom of this gross breach of freedom of speech at the highest level. And the Labor Party itself...
I'm so sorry, Senator. I missed the first part of your question.
I don't think it was a question.
The Minister, the Labor Party has already said, Anthony Albanese said before the election that he committed to a Royal Commission. Will we now have a Labor Party Royal Commission?
Well, the whole thing is based on a hypothetical about whether senators or MPs have had their social media interfered with. Let's wait and see what the answer to that question is. But let's continue the questioning with Professor Rennick.
Senator Roberts, thank you very much. Senator, just one moment.
Well, I don't spread COVID misinformation.
Is there a list of
Senator
band-aids?
Shoebridge. Senator Roberts, you have the
Thank you,
call.
Chair. Just a few points of questions for clarification, Mr. Pizzulo. I'll read from your website. Home Affairs brings together migration, cyber and infrastructure security, national security and resilience, and border-related functions working together to keep Australia safe.
Yes.
Now, you've been credited, and justifiably, I'd say, with the success in keeping our borders or closing our borders after your appointment in 2014 and the immigration. You've also been the inaugural and only Secretary of the Department of Home Affairs, which is seen as crucial in that role. That correct?
No,
I didn't mean about the praise. I meant about the roles.
I've occupied the office for the time period that you've spoken
Thank
about.
you. Thank you.
As to whether I've achieved any success in the role, it's perhaps...
Well, you've been widely credited with a lot of success, so we appreciate that.
That's for others to determine.
Do you
I've certainly been the occupant of two secretaryships over a decade, yes.
Yeah, and key in security. Do you consider that elected representatives who challenge government policy are domestic terrorists?
Well, I just go back to my earlier evidence. Terrorism's got a particular definition under our criminal code, under the ASIO heads of security power that are set out in the ASIO Act. If any person, elected or otherwise, is acting in contravention of the criminal law and acting as terrorists, then of course they are subject, of course, to a judicial process finding them so. But your question relates to elected members. I think you said challenging government policy.
Yes.
All other things being equal, that's just called democracy. That's not called terrorism. No.
Thank you. So do you consider it legitimate to deliberately or inadvertently censor elected senators who are duly elected representatives of the people if their social media statements differ from government policy?
Well, I took on notice both at a general aggregated level from Senator Antich and then from you specifically in relation to your own personal circumstances, whether we had, and I think you might be going to COVID here, but I just want to be clear about what you're asking about. But I took earlier on notice that we would look at the COVID-related referrals, the so-called takedown referrals, 4,000 and some other number associated, and just check that there were no members of the House nor members of the Senate included in that list. So if the answer is no, like zero, then the question in a sense becomes void because we haven't done anything. If, frankly, regrettably, if we've accidentally, without identifying a person's name, I don't know if you self-identify as a government senator, but if we've taken a view of Malcolm Roberts...
Not as a government senator, but as a senator.
Sorry, a member of the Senate, I should say. I do apologise. If we've
got some standards.
If we've inadvertently, and it would be inadvertent, made a referral of a sitting member or a senator, then I would find that regrettable because, in a sense, you're held to account by your peers and by your electors. It's not my job to hold you to account. Now, there is a grey area. If you, whether you're a senator or otherwise, were, and I couldn't for a moment imagine that you would do this, Senator, or any other senator would do it, inadvertently disseminating terrorist or violent extremism material, then, notwithstanding the privilege of a senator, my staff would take the view there's a referral here. But on matters of COVID, which were related to a public health emergency that was catalysed as a direction to us about 3 years ago by the then Morrison government, if one of your tweets or one of your postings has been inadvertently swept up in our referral process, we'll get to the bottom of that on notice and get back to you through the notice process.
Right, so I'm assured that if I was a terrorist or engaging in terrorist activities or promoting terrorism, you would treat me as no different from a terrorist.
Your status as a senator in those circumstances would
That's
provide
very reassuring.
no protection at all.
Thank you. It's also reassuring that if you inadvertently cause me to be censored in any way, that you would also protect my rights to free speech.
Well, I'm distinguishing here between the service that we were providing in support of the Health Department on a public health emergency, which is really not about terrorism, it is about public health advisories. Then I would, and I'll examine the data when Ms Hawkins and her people assemble it for me, I would take the view that we should not be doing referrals of sitting members or senators on public health issues. Terrorism, acts of incitement to violence, then we are in an area where the privilege that you have as a senator might well be thwarted by the criminal law, let's say. But I can't imagine that circumstance would arise in relation to COVID. I'm
reassured because privileges do come with responsibility, so I'm reassured by what you're saying. So do you not believe that Australian people have the same right to freedom of expression as I have?
Well, I thought I'd answered this before, but let's just recap. There is no, even on the internet, which is considered to be untrammelled and unfiltered and uncensored, there is no accepted absolute freedom of expression because you've got laws that relate to things like, for instance, you cannot stream the abhorrent abuse of a child.
Accepted.
Now, but once you accept that there is some constraint at the outer edges, self-evident cases of child abuse, a terrorist live streaming of an abhorrent act.
But questioning government policy, that's
no,
okay.
I was going to get to that, Senator, but then you start to get into distinctions and lines of definition. We're not arguing the principle anymore about censorship because even the internet, which is thought to be this untrammelled utopian public square of enlightened discourse and conversation, it's been many years, if not several decades, since that view went out the window because there have been both laws, there are treaties, there are international understandings that say no, there is certain content that is so vile, that is so unacceptable, that it will be taken down by those providers who are responsibly acting. Now, you can't get to every app and every dark website and every provider, particularly on the dark web, and they do peddle abhorrent material. So you're not going to regulate that world. You've just got to go hunting and take out other actions in relation to, if you like, what's under the clear web.
So I understand that there's a lot of grey area there, but what you're saying is I have the right to speak, but everyday Australians do not on COVID matters.
I'm struggling to understand how you've jumped to that conclusion.
Okay. Well, let's go two more points of clarification. In Australia, in 2022, we've had more than 30,000 excess deaths. That's the equivalent of 2 Dreamliners crashing with total fatalities every week. Would you inquire into the crashing of 2 Dreamliner aircraft every week for 52 weeks?
Well, my remit in that instance would be related to terrorist or related acts of violence or sabotage that cause those aircraft to go down. So, of course, I would get involved. And I know it's a hypothetical question that you're putting to me, but as a matter of principle, that would fall under our remit of aviation security as well as counter-terrorism. If you're asking me by way of analogy, some kind of quantitative analogy to say this many people died who otherwise would not have died because of the advent of, I think, COVID vaccinations or you used the term injection, I really would urge you to direct that question to the Secretary of Health and his officers, because it's not my responsibility to give you advice or evidence on public health issues.
No, I accept that. What I'm getting at is, would it be part of your remit to at least question what was going on with 30,000 deaths? That's more than 10 times.
Sorry, 30,000 deaths in relation to COVID or airline crashes?
COVID injections.
That's an assertion from you, Senator Roberts.
So that's 10 times the level of deaths from the Twin Towers World Trade Organisation collapse.
If there's a question of an abnormal rate of premature death, that is to say death beyond normal morbidity statistics, and I don't know what the science is, I don't know what the evidence is, I don't know what data you're pointing to.
Would it raise questions in your mind?
Well, it might raise questions for the Secretary of Health, so
okay.
I guess I'm suggesting that that's appropriately directed to him.
Okay. Oh, he'll be getting it. So I take my responsibility to serve the people because they pay my salary. Taxpayers pay your salary as a public servant. Just a final point of clarification. Do you work for the government or for the taxpayers?
Well, I'm a public servant employed under the Public Service Act, so ultimately I work for the public. In fact, as a matter of law, I'm required to be impartial, I'm required to be apolitical, I'm required to serve responsively the government of the day, because that's in law, but also in a way that is apolitical. So, for instance, if issues arise as to the records of former governments or issues arise in relation to the observation of the caretaker conventions, I would stand my ground and make potentially provide difficult advice or decisions to the government of the day. So generally speaking, by law we are required to be responsive to the government of the day. That's in the Public Service Act. On those rare occasions, and it doesn't happen in my experience very frequently, where the government of the day might do something inadvertently, typically that relates, for instance, to the records of decisions of previous governments, that might relate to the application of the caretaker conventions, I've got a duty not simply to say, well, I work for you, so I'll just do whatever you say, to say, hang on, that is either unlawful or it's contrary to Westminster conventions.
Thank you. So, final question. Would you fully cooperate with the Royal Commission, which Mr Albanese promised before he was elected, if it was tasked with examining these takedown notices around COVID?
I would cooperate with any commission of inquiry, royal or otherwise, commissioned by the government and instituted pursuant to letters patent. It wouldn't matter what the topic is, of course. We would always engage dutifully and conscientiously with any commission of inquiry.
Thank you very much, Mr Pizzullo. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Senator Patterson, you have the call.
Thank you, Chair.
National electricity objectives include price, quality, safety, reliability and security of supply. The government is now intending to add emissions reduction to those objectives. You, the Australian Energy Regulator, have made a submission to the consultation process, the government's consultation process, on the draft National Energy Laws Amendment 2023. In that submission you said, quote, the AER supports including an emissions reduction objective. This is support for a proposed government policy. Surely the very first value of the public service, the Australian public service, is meant to be impartiality. Why are you commenting one way or another on support for a government policy?
So I guess my objective from that would be that we are there to try and meet Australia's emission reduction targets in the least cost way. That's part of our job, and our decision making needs to ensure that happens, because our purpose as the Australian Energy Regulator is to ensure Australian consumers are better off now and in the future. And so when we assess what tools we need as the Australian Energy Regulator to actually be able to do our job effectively and to make sure that we can deliver upon that purpose, our considered view is that change to the legislation, to the objective for which we have to use our decision making, is required and is important to us being able to deliver upon our purpose. So it speaks fundamentally to our role rather than to the government's policy.
So do you consider that the Australian Public Service values and code of conduct apply to you?
I absolutely do, Senator.
Do you consider that the Australian Public Service values of impartiality apply to you?
Yes, I do, Senator.
Why are you stating support for a proposed government policy rather than impartially commenting on your ability to carry it out?
I'm not commenting on the policy, I'm commenting on the importance of the change to the work of the Australian Energy Regulator. So in that regard, my obligation is to make sure that we have the tools we need to discharge our functions such that we can ensure Australian consumers are better off now and in the future.
I put it to you that you are breaching the Australian Public Service values of impartiality by advocating support for a government policy. I would like you to take it on notice to fully explain how advocating support for government policy in a submission is impartial.
So, Senator, as I've said, we didn't advocate support for the policy. We're advocating support for the changes to the laws that are required to enable us to do our function.
The Australian Energy Regulator, your words, supports including an emissions reduction objective.
That is the change to the legislation required to do our function.
You've taken a side on this debate even before it started. You're required to be impartial. Why were you not impartial? I don't accept your answer.
I hear that you don't accept my answer, but my answer remains that we have asked for changes, and we constantly and repeatedly ask for changes to legislation, and it's in our strategic plan that we'll do this when it's required for us to fulfil our strategic purpose, and that is to ensure that energy consumers are better off now and in the future. So Limb 4 of our strategic plan actually says we will inform debate about Australia's transition, and that's to ensure that we can do our job to make sure Australian consumers are better off now and in the future.
So I suggest you read the Australian Public Service Values and Code of Conduct.
I have, Senator.
The current objectives of price, quality, safety, reliability and security are sound objectives. What level of compromise on price or reliability are you willing to accept to achieve the objective of emissions reduction?
When it comes time for us to be able to consider the new objective with all of the limbs in it, including the emissions reduction objective, we'll need to think about the value of carbon emission reductions in the context of the target to achieve net zero at 2050, to ensure that the investments that happen in things like transmission or gas networks are consistent with achieving that goal at least cost to consumers, which is where that element of making sure consumers are better off now and in the future.
So my question, I'll say it again, what level of compromise on price or reliability are you willing to accept to achieve the objective of emissions reduction? Because you've now got a new objective.
I don't see it as compromise, Senator. I see it as optimising.
Can I take note of that?
Absolutely.
It'll be interesting in the future. What are you going to do if the objective of emissions reduction conflicts with those existing objectives?
So we will need to optimise against the current list of objectives, and the inclusion of emissions reduction will become another limb. Already today, Senator, we have to make judgments and choices between the existing elements of that objective. So we constantly have to be thinking about trade-offs on behalf of customers in terms of price, quality, safety and reliability, and we will be also considering emissions reduction in that context.
So I put it to you that there is no way that the objective of price, reliability and emissions reduction can be achieved at the same time. So which one will you prioritise?
Senator Roberts, so I wonder if your questions are getting a bit accusatory. You've asked questions. Ms Savage is responding to your questions with her perspective.
I have constituents that are deeply concerned about electricity prices that have trebled in a couple of decades.
And you are open to ask your questions, but I'm just asking you to mind your manner.
Okay, thank you, Chair. But I'll say it again. I put it to you that there is no way the objective of price, reliability and emissions reduction, the facts show that, can be achieved at the same time. So which one will you prioritise? You've actually supported the government in its policy. So which one will you prioritise?
So, Senator, an example might help. So currently we have to think about price, safety, security, reliability. So when we make a judgment, we have to think about price and reliability. And those two things aren't always the same thing. More reliability can be high prices, lower reliability, safety and security. We just talked about, in response to Senator Van's question, an example about abolishing gas connections. There's a safety issue there. And so we're always and constantly in our work needing to optimise across those different objectives within the national electricity and gas objectives. And with the inclusion of emissions, it will be the same type of task. We have to look at it in its whole and we have to optimise across all of those objectives. So we do it today and we'll be able to do it tomorrow.
My view is that the people who tell us wind and solar are the cheapest form of electricity are lying. If they are the cheapest form of electricity, why do we need to change the electricity objectives to include emissions reductions so they are favoured?
So an example might be, you're thinking about generation technologies. We do a lot of work with the Australian Energy Regulator in electricity and gas networks. And so that's nothing to do with renewable energy necessarily. So if I take a gas network, for example, if you came to me as a gas company and said, I need to invest in an electric compressor instead of a gas compressor because I'm trying to meet my emissions reduction objective, then that's something that we couldn't consider necessarily under the existing obligations. And so under a future set of arrangements, that's something we could consider. So it's not necessarily about wind and solar. It's about lots of little choices that go along in this system to make sure it all adds up to the least cost way of meeting our climate goals.
So if the ministers, past and present, are not lying, if solar and wind are cheap and reliable, it would fit into existing objectives of price and reliability. Why do we need to change the objectives if the climate ministers are not lying?
So as I just said, Senator, and I'll repeat my answer, it's not always about wind and solar. Sometimes it'll be about networks. And in fact, most of the changes to the objective for the work of the Australian Energy Regulator will be about transmission, distribution, electricity and gas networks.
So it won't be about price versus emissions, yet everywhere in the world, every country that has a substantial proportion of solar and wind has had a dramatic increase in prices. That's fact. That is fact.
Are you asking me a question,
Yes,
Senator?
I'm asking you a question. How can you justify the statement that, there won't be a trade-off between emissions and price?
So I think I'd just covered that in the question before, which was that we'll be optimising across the new emissions reduction objective with the other elements of the national electricity and gas objectives.
What's the Australian Energy Regulator's position on nuclear energy?
We don't have a position on nuclear energy, Senator.
So now you're impartial.
We're always impartial, Senator.
Okay.
Last question, Senator Roberts.
You say as part of your retail energy market regulation that your other roles include, secondly, reporting on performance of the market and energy businesses, including energy affordability and disconnection of customers for non-payment of energy bills. What's the latest disconnection rate in each state? Could you take that on notice?
I can tell you at the macro level, and I can take the state-based data on notice, but for this current year, 21-22, which is the last full financial year of data we have, the number of disconnections was about 30,000. That is significantly less than what we were seeing before COVID. At the time before COVID, it was about 70,000 customers a year.
Could you take it on notice to give us the
state-by-state breakdown?
The 5 years?
Yes.
Well, actually, 3 years.
I've got the 5 year
years.
here at the macro level, if you'd like it, Senator.
I'd like to know the states as well, please, because I want to see how different states are behaving.
Oh, I have got the states here.
Okay.
Would you like me to read them out?
If you could put it on writing, that'd be good, thanks.
It's about 20, as you can imagine, it ends up being about 20 numbers.
But look,
I wonder if we would just copy it in the break and circulate it, just for ease. Is that okay with you, Senator Roberts?
That's fine.
Yeah, that's fine. But at a cumulative total, in 17-18 it was 72,000, in 2018-19 it was 70,000. The Australian Energy Regulator then asked retailers to stop disconnecting customers during COVID, so we saw a big drop down, 43,000 in 19-20, 17,000 in 2021, and then it's back at 29,000 in 21-22.
Thank you.
Thank
We'll
you.
get a copy.
Yep.
Senator, thank you.
Thank you. Senator McDonald, Senator Roberts, do you have questions of Sorry, do you have questions of Infrastructure Australia before we get to Northern Australia Infrastructure Facility?
Yes, I do. Thank you for appearing today. Does Infrastructure Australia have any views on what roadblocks there are to port development in Queensland? I know you wouldn't be prepared for it, but just off the top of your head.
We're not aware of any particular barriers.
Okay. Have you done any work on or any reviews on the effect of the Sustainable Ports Development Act 2015? It's Queensland legislation. It appears to me that legislation is a significant roadblock to ports in our state, because I don't know if you can even build a boat ramp under that law. It completely restricts, and I've got formed that view after listening to an expert on this, and I'll explain more in a minute. It completely restricts port development all the way up the Queensland coast except for Gladstone, Townsville, Hay Point and Abbott Point. Do you know who owns those ports?
No, Senator.
Queensland Government.
Queensland Government strategy from a long time ago.
They own the ports. So I had a meeting with a business in my state recently based on the Gold Coast. The name of the business is Sea Transport. It works internationally. It's a magnificent little firm in the Gold Coast. A truly incredible business, humbly creating some of the most incredible boats I've ever seen. What's that?
Oh, sorry.
They showed me a plan they had to create mini ports all the way up the Queensland coast, dozens of them, private investment. They've already been operating one successfully in the Gulf for 30 years, I think others around the country. From what I could see, it would literally unlock far north Queensland, especially in agriculture. Then the Queensland Government passed the Sustainable Ports Act that said, nope, no more ports in Queensland, except those that I just listed that the state government owns. Now, this is blatant evidence that productive infrastructure investment is being squashed so a state government can maintain a monopoly and control. Surely, don't we have to consider that an impediment to infrastructure in Australia?
We haven't done any sort of analysis on that particular legislation, but thank you for bringing it to our attention.
Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you.
Can I? I've got a few more questions.
Yep.
Now, my staff asked this committee yesterday, and they said I could either ask these questions in infrastructure, I think, or in regional infrastructure. When I got to regional infrastructure, I couldn't get the answers. They said to go to Infrastructure Australia and the North Queensland Water Infrastructure Authority, which is now tomorrow, I understand, in the Department of the Committee, Environment Committee.
Never been in that committee, so I can't help you.
Do you have a list of every infrastructure project that is started or underway in Queensland outside the southeast region, in other words, regional Queensland?
Mr. Brogan might be able to discuss that. We have a piece of work called market capacity, which may answer that question.
Yeah, Steve Brogan, Acting Chief Policy and Research. We collect data from the Queensland Government and other governments across Australia.
Including federal?
Including federal, that indicate information as simple as when a project would start and total investment cost, but no more detail than that for the purposes of understanding market capacity constraints, as supply and demand constraints in the market.
Labour, construction workers.
Correct, 100%. That's correct.
Could we get a list of that, please?
We can.
For Queensland projects outside of the Gold Coast, Sunshine Coast and Brisbane.
That data is collected with the governments through an agreement that is in place to formalise the confidentiality of the data that's supplied. So I understand your question. I think we have to take on notice what we can provide in respect of respecting that confidential information.
Yeah, I don't want the details. I just want a list of the projects worth over $100 million or more outside of the southeast metropolitan area.
We'll take that on notice, Senator.
Yeah, thank you.
Can I just say that we are scheduled to finish at 11 o'clock and we're just letting everyone know.
I've got
No,
one more.
Yep, of course.
Oh, maybe two. Two specific projects, please. The Cairns Western Arterial Road. It says that the website for the department says that Infrastructure Australia has not yet assessed the business case. Has it?
No.
It has not?
No, Senator, it has not.
Thank you. What about the Isaac and Whitsunday region's productive water supply, incorporating the Urana Dam proposal? Do you know where we are on that?
Mr Tucker.
Yeah, we have a proposal on our priority list again at stage 1, and it recognises that there is an opportunity to provide high productive water in that region. We've had some engagement with the proponents of the Urana Dam over the last couple of years, but a business case hasn't been brought forward to us for detailed assessment.
Okay, thank you. Last question, Chair. I haven't seen the great Queensland dividing range scheme on any list of infrastructure. Am I able to give this to the department, to the Infrastructure Australia?
Yep. You'd like the table?
Yes.
Yep.
It's a wonderful project. It goes over old ground, but it's entirely new. The concept is old, but the project is new. With a proven business case, it provides 4 million megawatt hours of hydropower, which is 11 times Snowy Hydro 2, and powering $2.5 billion in primary production every year at a cost of just $22 billion less than Snowy Hydro. So I think it's important that Infrastructure Australia is aware of this kind of proposal. It's being led by some people with track records on infrastructure.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, gentlemen. We'll let you go.
Those people are advised if they could please do that. Senator Roberts,
Okay, thank
over to
you.
you for 10 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you again for being here, Dr. Johnson and Dr. Stone. I would like to table these two documents, these two articles, Chair.
Certainly. What are they?
They're newspaper articles.
Right, we've probably, given that they're public documents, we probably don't need to table them. We can just circulate them around the committee.
So these are, well, the first document is about two articles in the Australian newspaper about parallel temperatures at Brisbane Airport, following on from Senator Rennick. The other one is about forecasts from the Bureau of Meteorology that have been inaccurate. So going to the first one, I've tabled some important news about parallel temperatures at Brisbane Airport, showing your temperature probes do record different temperatures to mercury thermometers in the same location at the same time. If I could please go to the Freedom of Information 30/6155 regarding the daily maximum and minimum temperature parallel observations for Brisbane Airport, which the stories relate to. What date did you first receive the FOI request? I think you said 2019?
Yeah, it was in 12th of December 2019 it was received.
What date did you release the documents to the applicant?
Well, the documents that were released as agreed with the respondent on the 6th of April 2023. But as I said in my earlier response to Senator Rennick's question, Senator Roberts, the documents released were the ones that we were quite happy to provide in 2019 to the respondent, but the respondent didn't wish to avail themselves of that material back in 2019.
So why did you fight to keep this information a secret for
We didn't
so long?
fight. Again, I reiterate in my response to Senator Rennick, we didn't fight anything. The request that we received in 2019 we were unable to fulfil because the information that was requested did not exist. So in the form that the respondent requested it. So we offered the respondent the material we had. They declined, sought to appeal it through the various appeal processes. Our decisions were reaffirmed by both the Information Commissioner and the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, and the information that we offered to provide the respondent back in 2019, we provided in April this year. So this notion, Senator, that the Bureau is withholding information is a fallacy.
So we'll have to look further into that. But
well, that's the record. That's the record and the truth, Senator.
Okay. You're paid by the taxpayer, Dr. Johnson, just like I am. So you're meant to serve the taxpayer, as I am. You have a remuneration package of over $500,000 a year from taxpayers. The information you have, the work you do, belongs to the taxpayer, correct?
Senator, as I said to my response to Senator Rennick, all the Bureau's data records are available to the public, either in digital or analogue form. They're held in the analogue form in the National Archive, and the digital records are available on the Bureau's website.
I've heard that before, but I've also seen people who can't access the information.
Well, Senator, I can only tell you the truth, and the truth is that those records are available on our website or in the National Archive by request.
So why did it take an application to the Administrative Appeals Tribunal for you to back down.
Sorry, I reject that comment, Senator. The information that was requested by the respondent or the proponent, I'm not sure how you want to characterise it, was not available. So we can't create something that's not available. We offered the respondent a set of alternatives which they declined initially and then subsequently agreed to take. So again, this notion that the Bureau is withholding information from the public or from this particular respondent is just not true. It's inaccurate.
Okay.
I can't be any clearer on that, Senator.
No, you're clear. Do you disagree that your temperature probes are recording different temperatures to mercury thermometers in the same place at the same time?
I'll let Dr. Stone address that.
No, thank you. No, you actually expect pairs of measuring instruments to have different measurements.
So if we had two probes, they would be slightly different. I understand natural variation.
Mm-hmm. Yep, within tolerance, yes.
Right. Would the difference between two probes be less or greater than the difference between a probe and a mercury thermometer?
So I reiterate that liquid in glass thermometers have a tolerance, so an acceptable error of 0.5 of a degree. Our electronic probes that we've been using for 30-ish years have a tolerance of 0.4 of a degree, and the electronic probes that we're about to roll out have a tolerance of 0.2 a degree. And you can expect a difference between two probes that is the sum of the tolerances of the two probes. I
understand that. So there is a difference between the mercury in glass and the probes?
In which sense? In tolerance? Yes,
no,
because
in the actual measurement. There'll be difference in the two measurements.
Well, sometimes, because they operate within that tolerance. So
I understand that tolerance.
For the ones operating at Brisbane Airport, for example, I have the figures on the distribution of readings and the... let me find it. The mercury in glass, sorry, I'll find it. I don't have the exact figures, I'm sorry, but approximately 40% of the time, one of the probes measured above, a higher amount than another.
The figures are 41%.
About 30% of the time, they measured below, and the balance they measured very similar.
So there is a difference?
Yes.
It has to be?
Correct.
Right. So that's 41% of the time it recorded a warmer temperature, and cooler temperatures were recorded 26% of the time.
Something like that.
Yeah. Okay. So are you saying that Marahasi or Abbott, their analysis is incorrect, or are you saying it may be correct, it's just within allowable tolerances, so you don't care?
Sorry, which part of their analysis? They
the
did
41% warmer and the 26% cooler.
If they are the figures, there we are. Sorry, yep, 40. Yep, I've got them here. Yes,
41, 26?
That is correct.
That's correct. Thank you. So, do you think it's significant that your new temperature probes are, on average, recording warmer temperatures than the mercury thermometers in the same location at the same time?
They're not on average. They're 2/100ths of a degree difference, which is not a significant difference.
I said, on average, they're recording a warmer temperature.
No, sorry. On average, there was 2/100ths of a degree difference between the liquid in glass thermometers.
So on average, they're recording a warmer temperature. The probes are.
0.02 degrees is not a significant difference.
So on average, they're recording warmer temperatures than the mercury?
No. 0.02 degrees is not a significant difference.
Okay. The story also says, and Graham Lloyd is a credible journalist, I've seen his work many times, says that Bureau of Meteorology said that you, Dr. Stone, claimed in response to these issues, presumably he asked you?
No, he didn't.
That all temperature data is publicly available on your website, including the parallel data. Is that true?
All of our digitised data is available on the website, and as Dr. Johnson mentioned to you earlier, data that hasn't been digitised is available from the National Archive.
So the temperature data that was released in the Freedom of Information request was not available on your website, was it?
There were two pieces of information provided. One was scans of field books, which is not been hadn't previously been digitised, and that was digitised upon request and provided. And then the electronic data is available on the Bureau website.
Well, why were you and the Administrative Appeals Tribunal trying to keep it secret?
Sorry.
Senator, with respect, I think we've addressed this notion that we are withholding information from the public is just false. And so the administrative appeals process was instigated by the proponent, who disagreed with the decision that both the Bureau and the Information Commissioner had made in respect to the Freedom of Information request. And again, I reiterate, the Bureau's actions were affirmed by both the Information Commissioner and the Administrative Appeals Tribunal. So again, this notion that the Bureau withholds data is false, and it's very important that it's on the record, because as you say, taxpayers have a legitimate expectation that the data that's generated with their money is available. So I just don't know how much clearer we can be
Can you
this.
Provide the URL where the parallel temperature data was available on your website prior to the FOI?
So this is a key point.
Yeah.
The applicants asked for the report in which parallel data is recorded, and I've just explained the data existed in two places. The respondent refused the offer of data on the basis that we couldn't provide it in one form. It doesn't exist in one form. There are field books that have the manual temperature readings written down, and there's electronic data.
Mm-hmm.
Bring those two together and you can construct a parallel data set, but they sought to have specified that they would only accept reports of parallel data which don't exist.
So I know...
Senator Roberts, we need to move on. Your time is up.
Thank you, Chair.
Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for being here again. I want to follow up on something that we discussed last time. So you may recall at last estimates we had a conversation about your power bills.
Yes.
A lot of people are talking about power bills these days.
They are.
This is estimates, and for the purpose of estimates, one of the purposes is to assess how you are spending taxpayers' money. So that's what I want to revisit. First of all, thanks for your detailed response. When you took my question on notice, that was SQ 23-003317. I hope all of the public service takes notes from you about how questions on notice should be answered. So
thank you.
We appreciate it. In that answer, you said that you elect to add the green power product to your power bills. That's totally optional. You opt in and you take extra money from the taxpayers to pay that expense. That's making your power bills 6.8%, say 7% more expensive than otherwise. Whether you opt in to pay the extra for green power, the extra 7% or not, the same power comes through the same plug, probably from a coal-fired power station. But you're choosing to waste taxpayers' money on this optional expense which makes no difference to what's turning the lights on. How much did you pay for green power over the last year?
I will have to take that on notice unless my colleague has the answer. So we'll try and come back to you with an equally exemplary response.
Good, thank you. Do you have any... I don't expect this of you, so do you have any guess as to what your power bill is?
I wouldn't like to guess. No.
Yeah, okay, thank you. And could you also tell me how much you expect to pay this coming year?
I can't tell you that, but I will certainly
take it on notice.
We'll certainly get that information for you.
Thank you. You're established under legislation, correct?
We are.
So I assume you've been established with the objective of funding the arts?
We have, yes.
Yes.
Investment and advocacy.
Investing in arts and advocacy on behalf of the arts. Thank you, that's clarified. What part of your objectives enable you to waste an extra 7% on a core component power a year on your power bills when it's literally the same power coming through the plug whether you pay the extra expense or not?
What part of our objectives? I think the Australia Council, Creative Australia to Be, does have sustainability goals, and we try to exemplify those which are important to the sector that we serve as well. Given that we invest in the sector, we advocate for the sector, I think this is generally respected by the arts and creative industry.
Well, I think you're wasting taxpayer money, and that should be cancelled. Wouldn't that money be better spent on the art that you're supposed to be funding?
Well, there's always a cost to investing and servicing the art we are funding, and I think you will find this is significantly respected by the sector.
The point is you're spending an extra 7% on a key component of the
I understand that.
Same plug, same power.
I understand that, but there are different kinds of value as well.
I'm not arguing with you on that point, Mr. Collette.
So this would be a small contribution to social and environmental value that is respected by the sector, and I'm sure if you ask their general view on should we save whatever the sum is, 7% of our power bill, and I confess I don't know our power bill as I sit here, you would find very broad support for what we do.
Well, I think there's a lot of ignorance, and I'm not singling you out, I think it goes right through the community, ignorance about this green power, because the same power comes from the same place through the plug, regardless of whether you pay that 7% or not. So I'd like to know what benefit you get from 7%.
Well, I'd take that on notice and come back to you once I understand the argument that I think you're making, that there's actually no difference in this power. So I need to satisfy myself on that argument, and then we can come back to you with a response.
Agreed. Pleased to hear that. Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Ross, do you have...
Thanks very much for your time.
Right, Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for appearing again tonight. Ms Spence, are you the beneficiary of any of your executive management or your board members, the beneficiaries of any benefits given from any airlines here in Australia?
No, Senator. And if we received any hospitality or gifts or anything like that, we would declare it, but I'm certainly not beneficiary of any... Sorry, can you repeat that phrase again?
Beneficiary of any benefits gifted from any airlines here in Australia?
Only what we would report in our gifts register.
What are they?
I can't think of anything that has been. If we had, if any, I can say that I haven't, but certainly if any of my executive team had, it would be reported, and as far as I'm aware, nothing's been reported.
Can you please take it on notice to provide a list detailing anything CASA representatives have received?
Yes,
on our website.
It'll be on our website, but yes, of course we can, Senator.
So you're going to do that, Ms Spence?
Yes, Senator.
Thank you. Could I have a medical expert? Is it Mr Margiela? Is that how you pronounce it?
Margiela, yes, Senator.
Margiela, okay, thank you. What is the definition of subclinical?
Senator, I'm not a medical expert of that type.
So Kate Manderson's not here again?
Senator, we only found out, the request only came to us yesterday asking her to come to the thing and to come to Senate estimates, but she was travelling overseas on official duties and so is unable to be here this evening.
So Chair, I just want to put on the record that we asked, I think about 2 weeks before the previous Senate estimates, and we asked several weeks before this Senate estimates. That's twice we've asked for Kate Manderson because of her role as a senior medical officer.
So, Senator Roberts, just get your office to send copies of that to the committee.
Okay.
Senator, while I've got you, one thing probably I should have mentioned, of course, is a number of the executive team would get lounge membership by the airline, so I'll provide that on notice. Who's got those memberships? Like, for example, I've got a chairman's lounge membership.
Thank you. Who's responsible, Mr Margiela, for passenger safety with regards to pilot and medical health evaluation and monitoring in Australia?
Senator, we conduct medical certification, as we've spoken about before.
Yep. Is there any other department, agency or organisation, either domestically or internationally, that has legal authority, responsibility, jurisdiction, oversight or liability over Australian pilot and passenger safety?
Senator, I'd imagine that employers have obligations for pilots, But when it comes to certification of pilots and whether they're fit to fly, that's our accountability.
So, apart from private companies, employers, no government agency, department or organisation?
When it comes to determining whether a pilot is fit to fly, that's our remit. So our remit is aviation safety and the medical certification that would support aviation safety.
Thank you. So it's fair to say the buck stops with you or with CASA?
Within the scope that I described, yes.
Yep. So your website says that CASA uses multi-crew endorsements as a means of risk mitigation. Their use enables pilots to continue flying despite the presence of medically significant conditions which would otherwise pose an unacceptable risk to the safety of air navigation. How many pilots are currently flying passengers with a medically significant condition? CASA restriction could result in a pilot incapacitation.
Senator, there is a requirement for most airline aircraft, as you'd know, to have 2 pilots. That extends to safety mitigators well beyond medicine. I'm not sure exactly what your question is.
I want to know how many pilots cannot fly alone.
I could take that on notice, but it would be a very small number.
Okay.
Yep.
Can you please provide on notice how many multi-crew endorsements CASA has issued by year over the last 5 years? By year, each year.
We can take on notice just to see if that data is available.
Thank you. How did you evaluate the aeromedical implications of the pilots taking the new mRNA technology injections, COVID injections, at low atmospheric conditions?
Senator, we would not have made any evaluation of that.
No evaluation?
No.
Okay. In an aeromedical context, do you consider that you have any additional responsibility to evaluate or at least surveil a new medical technology that only has provisional approval?
No, Senator, we don't.
Okay. But you told me you have responsibility for aero health monitoring.
Senator, when we evaluate a medicine, we look at what the potential significance of that medicine is on a pilot. We don't test that. We rely on medical authorities to test whether medicines are suitable for use. We look at what the implications are for medicines in an medical context, and as we've spoken many times before, when it comes to vaccinations, we treat vaccinations all the same. So a vaccination that's approved for use in the population, we simply ask that pilots stand down from flying duties for 24 hours to make sure that there's no adverse reaction to that, and if there are reactions to that beyond that, we would expect them to report that and stand down.
Are you aware that there is a COVID-19 vaccine injury compensation scheme in operation in Australia now?
Senator, I would take your word for that. I'm not aware.
So you weren't aware of it?
Senator, no.
I wonder what it's for.
You tell me.
People have been injured or killed by these injections. You mentioned 24 hours. They have to stand down for 24 hours.
Senator, we do not have a role, as I think we've spoken about on many occasions, about the health implications of vaccinations on the Australian population. That is a matter for the Department of Health.
You're solely responsible for safety.
We are solely responsible for determining whether there is an aviation safety risk, and I can categorically tell you that it is our view there is no aviation safety risk from the vaccinations.
And Senator, as we've said repeatedly, we have not had a single incident involving an adverse reaction to a COVID vaccination by a pilot.
Are you aware that that last year, 2022, there were more than 30,000 deaths after the vaccines were introduced? Sorry, for the whole of the year.
Sorry, Senator, that's got nothing to do with us.
Okay, let's continue. So it's not of interest to you? Because they're temporarily correlated with the injections.
Senator, I genuinely feel we have nothing to add to the line of questioning.
Let's continue then. In February 2022 Zoom meeting with Virgin Pilots, CASA Principal Medical Officer Kate Manderson stated that the provisionally approved mRNA vaccines can cause myocarditis and pericarditis, but that she'd rather pilots got those conditions from the vaccine rather than COVID itself, which she claimed to be of higher risk. What evidence did Kate Manderson have to substantiate these comments?
Senator, we categorically can tell you that there is no aviation safety risk that we consider is associated with COVID vaccination.
Yet Kate Manderson, your senior medical officer, says that the vaccines can cause myocarditis and pericarditis.
I expect, Senator, what she was saying is that you may, but the bigger issue is that there's a greater chance of those sorts of impacts if someone actually got COVID. And again, I would definitely want to see that quote in broader context, because I think reading something like that out could be potentially quite misleading.
You're saying that without hearing it?
I'm saying that without seeing the whole context in which the statement was made.
We'll get it to you.
That'd be great. Thanks, Senator.
So I want to know what evidence, medical evidence, Kate Manderson had that can substantiate her comments.
Okay, Senator.
So I take it on notice?
Yes, Senator.
So I asked you on notice, SQ 23-003393, to provide me the rates of significant diseases over the previous 5 years for the following conditions: pericarditis and myocarditis, thrombosis with thrombocytopenia syndrome, immune thrombocytopenic purpura, capillary leak syndrome, Guillain-Barré syndrome, any cardiac-related conditions or injuries, any immune-related conditions or injuries. These are recognised adverse reactions to COVID-19 injections. The injection manufacturers and the medical authorities have acknowledged this. You completely failed to answer any of them for any year. Your response to me was that your medical record system does not even capture information on these diseases in a way that can be accurately reported.
That's correct, Senator.
I am struggling to understand then how you have not been misleading in your previous evidence. Over many sessions you have maintained to me that there have been no safety signals or concerns about COVID vaccination, yet I am only now finding out that your medical record system does not even have the capacity to report on some of the most significant adverse events to COVID vaccination. How can you maintain there's nothing in the data to indicate a concern when you don't have the data? You're literally flying blind.
Well, Senator, we haven't had any incidents associated with COVID vaccination, so there is no data because there are no incidents. I'm sorry, Senator, I don't know how much clearer I can be.
But you can't measure this.
We haven't had an incident to measure it with, though, Senator.
Sorry, Senator Robertson and Ms Spencer, I'm loath to do this, but Senator Roberts, I could go to standing order, and I can't remember the number, but it's titled tedious repetition. I know you've been asking these questions in and out. I don't know how anyone in CASA can explain to you any more that they don't have any more evidence. You have the call, Senator Robertson, and Senator McDonald is waiting patiently as well, but we've all waited patiently all day, so you keep going.
Does CASA still maintain that it is unaware of any pilot grounded with a COVID vaccine injury?
Yes, Senator.
Okay. I find it hard to believe, given the rates of adverse events that are huge and startling, that no pilots have it, but every other citizen does, every other category of citizen does. What supervision of Qantas engine trend monitoring is undertaken by CASA, given that there have been a significant amount of incidents over the near past?
Senator, is this around issues around the turnarounds with Qantas aircraft? Is that what?
It's air incidents. I've got data.
Oh.
Can I table this, Chair?
Yes, of course.
Thank you.
Senator, if what I understand is correct, and you're talking about sort of some of the media coverage around the number of turnarounds because of potential concerns with aircraft safety, we've done an analysis over a 10-year time frame saying there's been no material increase in the number or severity of air turnback type occurrences in 2023 to date.
So perhaps you could tell me on notice whether or not the list I've just given you from a whistleblower is normal or abnormal.
Senator, certainly I'll be happy to do that, but as I said, based on the analysis that we've done, there hasn't actually been any material increase in the number or severity of air turnbacks. But that's on the analysis that we've done. I'll take on notice based on the list that you've just provided us.
So this is a list of incidents that I've tabled that have been provided to me. Can you please verify if those have been reported or lodged with CASA just do it on notice?
Yeah, but Senator, based on my quick scan, these are all ones that we're aware of, and I don't think that would change what I've just told you about no material increase in the number or severity of air turnback type occurrences.
Well, perhaps you could have a look at it in detail first before making a comment.
Yeah.
And I'd like to know, is this surprising or normal?
I think that's what I was just telling you, Senator.
I understand,
based
but I'd
on-
like to know once you've had a look at it,
Yep.
not before you've had a look at it. I would be surprised if it's normal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator